Hello, everybody. Awesome to see everyone here. And the chat's already kind of blowing up. So looking forward to all the questions and stuff as we dive into it. Ron is here. He just went off screen. So there he is. All right. So cool, everybody. I'm Sean Roberts. I lead the AI and AX strategy here at Netlify, and do a lot of the engineering work to make those things happen. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Ron and Zeno. And I'll let them introduce themselves. And yeah, go ahead, Zeno.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Ron. Hey, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. Um, I'm a developer experience aficionado turned now agent experience aficionado. So I'm really excited to chat with you all. I'm the founder and CEO of Resend, but I love open source. I build projects like Dracula, which is like a theme that everyone uses and stuff like that. But yeah, really excited to chat here today.
And Ron, go for it, bud.
Hi there, I'm Ron Bronson. I, until a few months ago, spent 7 years at 18F, which is a government sort of digital transformation agency. I was head of design there for the last 4 years, but I'm also a part-time professor at the University of Michigan. And so my work, because I sort of veer between, the practical and the tactical, and also doing academic stuff, AX stood out to me as somebody who spent a lot of time in service design and UX, and so immediately started talking to Sean and the whole gang, and excited to talk to you all today.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, this is gonna be a really fun one, at least for me. I hope it is for everybody else. But so this is like, you know, when especially when Ron and I first kind of met up several months ago, we had first introduced this concept of AX, or at least named it, right? Like I think as an industry, we were all like, there's something new here, and like we can't quite put our hands on exactly what it is and like how things are changing, especially amidst lots of things that are constantly changing in terms of how we build things and worry about how AI is going to affect the job market and things like that. And um, AX is like, when just to put to share the definition around it, right? Agent experience is the holistic kind of experience about how an agent uses a digital service, right? And the we'll probably end up talking a lot about developer tools and stuff today, because especially myself working at Netlify and Resend, with Zeno, we target developers as our kind of core end users and users of our product. But ultimately, agents will be in everything in every different market. I think we've first seen this kind of agent experience kind of discipline rising in the developer tool side, because I think what we'll see is that AX matters when agents themselves are in some market, or some have some proliferation in an industry. And right now, it's all over the place in developer tooling, coding, and all that side. So we've kind of gotten this early glimpse in like what these things look like and what's good. And when we think about agent experience, right, like I had mentioned, it's this kind of holistic experience that agents have with your product. Um, Very similar to how we think about user experience, right? Like, what's the total user experience? Like when someone comes to your product, like if they went to Disney World, right? Like the user experience doesn't, or the experience doesn't start when they get to the ride. It starts at the parking lot when they purchase their tickets, all this stuff like that. What's that total, their entire interaction with you, how they learn about you, and what their experience is like. And now with agents kind of working on behalf of in consumers, what's their experience like, and how can we optimize for that? And understanding the implications that doing that has on the ability to support that audience, the ability to grow our market, and ultimately, I think, relevancy in the future. And with Ron and Zeno today, and myself, I think we have a good kind of mix of practitioners trying to apply these practices, and also our ability to kind of examine the implications of serving agents on behalf of customers. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into these areas. So this is still just kind of context setting here. So that's what the agent experience side of things is. And if you haven't checked it out, there's agentexperience.ax has both these definitions written down as well as these principles that we kind of are seeing emerging and we're trying to apply in our practices. And I think there's a handful that are going to be really important in our conversation today, which is the ones around trying to keep human centricity still at the forefront of this, if not, more important. The more that we kind of practice AX, I think it's coming up as more and more obvious that, this is more of a human problem than it is a programming problem. Then there's agentic accessibility, and then contextual alignment. I think those are the three biggest things that are cropping up in the AX side of things, and excited to kind of dive into that. So bringing this back to kind of our panelists today, I want to throw this over to you, Zeno. So as you had mentioned, you're kind of becoming an expert in the AX side of things, and trying to apply some good practices and the principles at Resend. What impacts are you seeing from your efforts at Resend for applying good AX?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny because when we started, we were very much focused only on the developer, right? And when we think about developer experience, we definitely feel like it's almost like a stairs that you're trying to climb, So the user gets to the homepage, they see that first, website, and they try to understand what the product is. If you do a good job, they have an idea of what it is. It's engaging, it looks exciting, and then they sign up, then they get a sign up email. If it takes, like a second, they get in, and then they go through the onboarding, and then they can do the aha moment within the product, right? Whatever it is. For us, it's sending your first email. So we thought about every little step of the way for developers to create a great DX. Now, the opposite is also true. If you go to a website and it's a little bit confusing, you go to the sign up, it takes forever to get an email, that's bad. And then you go to the onboarding, like it doesn't work. You download the SDK, it doesn't work, or there's a typo in the docs. That's poor DX, right? So when we started approaching agent experience, what we tried to do is like trying to map those touch points. And the onboarding one was a very critical one. Resend is an email API for developers. It's not a extremely new product, right? Email APIs have been here forever. You have Mailgun and SendGrid and SES and Postmark. All of these competitors, the way they work is you go to their product, you sign up. There's already some friction in many of them where you can only sign up with the work email. How does that work with agent world? Or there's a reCAPTCHA on the sign up page. Do you really want to have that? I understand it's for bots, but maybe you want bots in your app now. Then you go to the onboarding. It takes like 2 business days, 3 business days for people to review your sending and for people to authorize. You have to fill up a whole form, multiple steps along the way. And what we tried to do is like, let's revert that altogether. Let's remove all that friction. Let's put the friction on us. And that was the intuition, right? Just do a better product overall. Turns out that was amazing for agents. So as we were looking at the data, in terms of like your question, like what was the results and the impact around like January when we had the aha moment of like, oh man, we got to start investing and thinking about this. We had like 25,000 new signups every month with Resend. And then in April, we had 50,000. In May, 55,000. So there's a lot of things that are happening in the industry, and I feel like this boom with agents, it has definitely impacted our business and shaped the way we're thinking about the product.
At Netlify, we've seen very similar impacts as well, like where, we as a platform had made a lot of decisions early on around, like, even though it was for developers, there's a lot of problems that we don't think developers should have to focus on, just because those things are not unique value to them, right? Like they're just like everyone's got to set up a server, and now you got to configure DNS, and now you got to configure, certificates and things like that. And we can just remove as many of those chores as possible, and and then lower the friction down to as little as possible. Even I think I wasn't here at the time. This was, Netlify is now 10 years old, but around 10 years ago, the initial versions of this was really like bring a zip folder with an HTML site, ready to go, and drop it on the site, and boom, it's live. It went by a different name at the time, and everything. So but like, it was just bring your site and we'll host it for you. You don't worry about anything. And, while that feature's still around today, that ethos of how you should simplify as much as possible, but still give escape hatches where you need to, but like the base experience should be easy to go from idea to production very fast. And we had the same experience, like when Bolt and various different kind of agent tools are trying to figure out how they can not only generate code but then ship it, and they need their agent to be able to hook into that. It was just so easy for them to just take what was available on the Netlify platform and just start doing that. And that's exactly the same thing. And it was like, oh, we're already on this path. We're miles ahead of everyone else. And it's because of that, just like remove the barriers to going from sign up to shipping. And even now, like, like I'd mentioned before, like you can still do that drop experience, like bring your site, but you don't even have to sign up. So like literally all you got to do is bring your site. And that, like, again, that carries over so well. And I think that we're seeing that kind of difference where these systems that are better set up for this kind of low friction adoption are getting a pretty significant lead compared to things that are more, all right, set up the thing, configure the thing, babysit the thing, like all of those kind of like things that were fine maybe in the past are now overwhelmingly slow, right? Like where maybe creating the code and doing all that other stuff maybe was the slow part before and burdensome. As that's become super easy and fast for people, it's really easy to see the slowness in these other parts and the friction that they add. And I think that, you have to have both sides work really well. Like on the resend side, it's not just that you should be able to generate an email very fast. You should also be able to start sending that email to your end consumers really fast. And I think that's definitely where we're seeing, like, that is what that investment in AX is bringing to the business side for people who are doing so. But, like I mentioned before, I think right now we're seeing this in the developer tooling side, right? Like, because agents are the best at coding right now, but like not the best at a lot of other things. And so it's, happening a lot in our market. So, but Ron, on your side, I know you don't strictly work in the developer tool side, so I'm curious from your perspective, what opportunities are you seeing across systems that are maybe outside of developer tools, or maybe a different kind of, developer tool adjacent, like design tools and things like that?
So I think that having sort of being fluent in the front end side of things, and spending a lot of time building things on my own, seeing how agents are being deployed really everywhere. I mean, every tool basically at this point is still giving you the opportunity to, but I'm really looking at this, pardon me. So I've been looking at this a lot from our earlier conversations and a lot of the writing, thinking about this from the consumer side. So you all talking about this from the dev side, and really from the in-house side of how do we deploy these things outward. Look at the gains we're getting from this on that side of it. And so a lot of what I've been talking to folks about, a lot of the opportunities that I'm seeing, especially coming really from government recently, dealing with a lot of public facing things, is figuring out how you can use agents to reduce friction in those mundane experiences. You know, if you talk about even non-government work, but like public facing things, a lot of paperwork involved, and being able to, you know, really do anything. Lots of administrative debt, we call it. And so how can you use agents to reduce some of that friction to be able to get people the things they need access to? If you're a person that's got 2 jobs and you've got kids and you're not able to get access to, you know, things that might be available in your community. It could be something very simple like, do you know there's a free summer camp for your kids? You just got to push a button and sign up, but you don't have time to sign up. You know, if you could deploy agents in a way that would allow you, again, from a GUI, from some kind of tool that would allow you to do that, there are lots of different opportunities like that that are very sort of consumer facing, that are not people who are not technical, folks who don't do the day-to-day work that we do, who have no idea what an agent is, don't care what an agent is. And I think that's my engagement with a lot of this, is how do we reduce the friction of understanding where the opportunities are in tools like this, so that we can, and when we deploy these things in various contexts, the value add for people is pretty significant, because as we can say, there's lots of exponential opportunity that we're able to get from being able to deploy these things. But for folks on the consumer end, they're not seeing that as much. So being able to demystify that has been sort of my thought, my engagement with a lot of this.
Yeah, 100%. I think to your point, like we're still, I had a conversation with someone the other day that kind of also helped me zoom out a bit. But we're really just a handful of months, relatively speaking, into all of this dynamic, and it feels like we've been here for a while now. But the reality is like this is like we're not even at the like early adopters of you know, we're still like the very slim part of the early adopters. And I think that for these things to really get that larger impact outside of things, and we see this with like, you know, Claude and ChatGPT and these things that are becoming more mainstream, is their ability to have more practical application, not just the professional application, right? So like we you know, when we talk about developers, we're really talking about the professional tools, or the prosumer, the people trying to build with these complex what was a really complex skill set, they're now able to reach into, and then how can we make them successful? I like, you know, when I hear you talk, like the thing that I'm like, okay, if the government, regardless of country, like, but if the government focused on having a good agent experience, right? As one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is agents as a concept becoming more mainstream. Just the ability for those two things to align better. So like, to your point, I think most things in terms of government access and capability, people don't lean into purely from the fact that they don't know it exists. And or it's hard maybe to get access to, or things like that, right? There's so many programs that people qualify for that they don't even know exists, right? And to stay on top of that stuff, it would be a full-time job, if not multiple full-time jobs to do so. But for an agent, it's literally like, you know, if there was a great AX from the government side, or an organization side, I mean, it could just work on your behalf, right? And try to sort out, these are the things that this person is interested in. These are the things that would, you know, they're trying to optimize for retirement, or they're trying to optimize for getting into school, things like that. And these various different programs are available to help support you, or they're trying to start a business, whatever it is. They can find those things and build towards them. I think, you know, from a like I mentioned, it's so new, right? It's like it's hard to grasp the implications of this that we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years, especially, you know, because like regardless of how easy it is to adopt these things now, when we talk about the scale of governments and institutions and education and things like that and healthcare, they're still really slow because of lots of other reasons. And I do think that, even though we're going to get really fast, things are going to get, really easy to adopt. I think it really will be in the next 5 to 10 years where we start seeing these like really big lifestyle changes, and where we can have these agents that work really well autonomously and kind of work on your behalf and not just the professional setting. And that'll be extremely interesting, right? Like, um, and then we'll have to start thinking about the like, Zeno will have to start thinking about the agent experience of not just the people sending it, but like the receivers of these emails and how they get processed and how they optimize for agents to consume that, right? Which is maybe you're already thinking about that stuff, but like that definitely seems like it just keeps kind of the can of worms just keeps spilling out, right? Like what's the next thing you got to worry about and so forth.
That's so true. Yeah. One point to that is that you yeah, there are all these different ways of looking at agents from a feature perspective, right? Like, oh, now that I'm building a product, how do I adapt my product to that new reality? And each industry is going to look different, for sure. One of the interesting things in our case is that when people send emails, they can send emails using HTML and plain text, right? But as we've seen with LLMs.txt, as was one of the examples, maybe we'll cover that later. If you give the data unstructured or structured with like very lightweight number of tokens, so you strip out all the markup that's unnecessary on a website, and you just give the actual content. It's less tokens for the agents to consume. It's so much better in so many ways. And in our industry, yeah, like the plain text version is now getting more important than the HTML version. I can definitely see a world where agents are sending emails on behalf of people. They are sending emails to inboxes that are managed by other agents. Those agents are then like forwarding those emails. So it's going to get wild.
Yeah. And I mean, I think and maybe we can kind of dig into some of these questions um, uh, in the chat here, because I think they start getting into this area. So there's the kind of technical product use case of like being able to send emails, right? But the content of those emails and the implications of what they're sending, right? So there might be sign up forms, they might be collection notices, they might be any number of things that like have varying degrees of impact on a real human's life, right? Like and their day to day, and then agents working on their behalf. It becomes really essential to kind of sort out the parameters in which we allow them to work. And so I want to come back to this in a little bit. I think let's talk about the applications and what we're doing first, and then we'll talk about how to protect things, and go from there. There's a quick question I see coming up. How are agents different from AI like Chat GPT? So they're not really different from agents like ChatGPT. ChatGPT is itself an agent and or has agents running underneath it. Really, what we mean by agents in this context is this program that's able to be sent off to do a task on behalf of someone else, and has varying degrees of agency to make decisions about how to complete that task, and how to handle the feedback of that task and things like that. So when you ask ChatGPT to tell you how to make this recipe, and then it kind of goes off and researches it and then comes up with this information about it, and then you say, oh, I have this dietary restriction, and now I can process that stuff differently and think through it. That really is agents kind of working under the hood there. So we mean the same thing. And just because of so and there's a secondary question on that. So Cursor basically is an agent. Yes. So Cursor is an agent. Cascade from Windsurf is an agent. Those are coding agents and things like that. So they help you build, generate code and make decisions about your code base and things like that. So I think the reality is there's kind of two kind of streams I think that we see with agents. There's the kind of very specialized agents, and then there's like this general purpose multi-agent things that try to like do everything for you. And so I think the do everything for you type of buckets look like the Chat GPTs and the Claudes and things like that. And the hyper specialized are like the Codex would be a specialized coding agent. AMP from SourceGraph is a coding agent. There are other agents that are very specific to handling legal problems. There's healthcare specific agents. There's tax, management and processing specific agents. Things that are very specific to a domain. And those agents can still work with other things and do things on your behalf, but their kind of scope of what they work on is very specific. Cool. So let's go on to this next part where we kind of talk about the specific applications of like what we're doing for good AX. Let's start with you, Zeno. So like what approaches is your team doing or taking to providing a good agent experience at Resend?
Yeah, we have this interesting position where we serve people with infrastructure for them to send their emails. And we also have this SaaS component, right? Where as a creator of a software as a service where people sign up and do things in that dashboard, we've been thinking a lot as a team about how we can create a dashboard that is agent friendly. And many of the features that we have always wanted to build that were first just designed maybe for like enterprise customers, like, oh, we need audit logs. That's an interesting one. The ability for every single event that happens in the dashboard to be registered, right? So you can go later and check it out what happened in your service. Now, we've always thought about that from the angle of a human. But if you're serving agents, guess what? Now this is more important than ever. You need an audit trail of every single action that an agent took. Same with API keys. So if we're giving the ability for an agent to take actions, we have like some permissioning and things like that you can do on the API key, like, oh, you can only do this type of action to this type of entity. But now we are rethinking that. Maybe we need even more granular permissions, and role-based access control are back for your app. Like you go to an app and then you have the admin and the member and different roles for people within an organization, within a workspace. Guess what? Now maybe you need a new one for agents, or maybe you need more granular ones that you can grant to an agent to do just this specific task. Maybe you don't trust them to update your billing, but you might trust them to do this one particular task, right? So yeah, we are rethinking from the ground up the product from that perspective.
Yeah, right on. Are you building with any particular technologies? Are you using MCPs today? Are you providing context files and various things like that? Like, what's kind of your stack for kind of supporting AX today?
Yeah, definitely MCP is the number one, especially, we're very early to MCP. And then when ChatGPT announced that we're going to support that, we're like, okay, this is definitely now centralizing to this one protocol. But we also try to do things that are a little bit more unusual, like trying our own product as an agent. So get an agent to do a particular task in our product and seeing what happens. Where do they get stuck? Where they need the human in the loop? What are the parts that they can no longer go past? Like one very silly example is we have this broadcast feature within our product that you send an email to a lot of people. And we wanted to make the experience of sending this email a little bit different, more unique, because when you're sending to 100,000 people, it's extremely scary. People are telling us
Sure.
like, oh my gosh, like doing that action is extremely scary. So we did like a slider on the UI. So everyone loves it. You slide. It reminds like the old iPhone slide
Yeah.
pattern. Turns out agents are not very good at sliding.
Yeah.
It's not something that they can do very well. Move like one pixel
Yeah.
towards one side or another. So you got to rethink the UX patterns you're adopting to. So
So,
there's a
so
lot
is
of
this
work
is
that
this mattering more
yeah.
on the browser use side as well? Like, is that what you're, thinking about there?
Because those are the two use cases. It can be through MCP. That's one interface, but the UI is still a valid interface. And
Yeah.
for non-technical users, I believe that will be the UI for a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend folks to try to
Yeah.
see how an agent will perform on your website, and then you might be surprised by where they can no longer move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So the um to step back and talk about this more high level again is that, given these agents, these systems that kind of go off and do things on your behalf, either researching, performing an action, things like that, um there are a handful of ways that they'll actually do that. And the whole part about agent experience is trying to help optimize and work well within these patterns. Um, One way, like we were talking about, is specifically for uh, apps and digital services that are web based. You'll see that many agents will just spin up a web browser and navigate to your site and do things and kind of work on it. And so there's that type of interface that agents are actually doing today that you have to optimize for. Zeno pointed out a good one around this slider is not a great interaction model for something that doesn't slide or doesn't have that input. But there's other things, we've chatted about this on the GitHub side of things, which is like captchas and things like that, which, for sensitive actions, um, there's kind of workarounds that kind of work okay in these kind of browser type of interfaces that agents can do on behalf of users, but they're not great. So like how do you prove how do you ensure that the end consumer is a human that delegated this task, even though it is very intentionally not a human that's performing it, which is different than what we thought before. It's either it has to be a human. We have to ensure that, but now it's like, you can be an agent, a bot like system, but you still have to prove that you're working on behalf of my end consumer. And in that browser interface, that's a really challenging environment and stuff that needs to be very intentional. Then there's these other sides where agents are interacting with you. MCP, Model Context Protocol. This is a protocol layer that essentially people or digital services or anyone who wants to build an MCP server, they can register tools and information for which agents that support MCP can consume and use. So I can create an MCP that allows, a Netlify. Our Netlify MCP allows people to deploy websites, for example. So two main parts of that is making sure that there's good context so that the agent creating code that should be compatible with Netlify is doing that properly. And then there's the tool calling. So like when we're actually going to make a deploy, it has to do that successfully. So what are the inputs for that and things like that? And MCP as a protocol is still emerging as far as the rest of the world is concerned. I know we've all been super steeped in it, but like it's came out in like I think November of last year, and it still has a lot of rough edges, but is doing a lot of great things in terms of showing us this path forward where if digital services provide an agent experience through an MCP, if they conform to a certain contract, then anything that supports that contract can operate with them in a very good way. Especially in given the fact that an LLM, an AI model, sits in between those things and can normalize various different APIs and inputs and requirements for an agent to work on. So MCP is still is a very big and important kind of movement that's happening on the industry side. And then the third kind of interface that agents really use. I mean, there's a long tail of these things, but like the third biggest is agents just trying to use your website or digital service directly through making network calls. And this doesn't look the same as them using a browser. This looks like them sending just network calls to your website or a potential, your documentation site, and trying to navigate that. And the big difference there is it's similar to the browser use, but you're not going to run JavaScript. You're not going to be able to do all of the same things that you might be able to do in a browser-based environment. And so that's really important for people who don't have a web or a plain text version of their website, for example, or something like that. If they require to be ran in a certain environment, but an agent's trying to interact with them in a way that doesn't, it just won't work. So that's not to say that you should give up and try again. But there's ways you need to optimize and think through that when an agent's trying to interact with you. So those are the kind of three biggest ones: is browser use, agents trying to come through you using a browser, agents trying to come to you using a protocol that's like an agentic, well-defined protocol that you're kind of supporting that agent directly, or agents trying to directly consume your context and your content via primitive network calls and trying to make sense of how to use your service from that. So those are the three ways. And then kind of the tools that we kind of have at our disposal are kind of helping us optimize those ways. And Zeno was saying that, they're using MCP as the primary way, right? Because that is where a lot of industry is going. A lot of tools from Claude to OpenAI's ChatGPT to various, it's hard to find an agent nowadays that doesn't support MCP. In some ways, they support it varying degrees of effectiveness, but like at the base protocol, they generally support. So that's a super important one. And then there's lots of other things that they're doing in terms of supporting the browser interface and supporting, for example, the content going into their emails and things like that. So that's a lot of context setting in terms of like what's available for agent experience, optimization. Ron, on your side, I'm gonna stop talking now. So on your side, but what approaches are you seeing in your review of kind of agent interactions? And this could be, specific to how they're interacting with the government side or things like that. Is there anything that you're seeing that's cropping up as particularly exciting or potentially cautionary in these interactions?
So most of what I'm looking at, I've talked about the exciting a little bit. I think in terms of the opportunity for things like even things like MCP, which I could not explain to my dad, right? But when you think about like the opportunity if we're going to be using these things, figuring out how to provide that context, making sure there are guardrails, are super important. And so I think that to me, in terms of risks, we talked a lot about it. You talked about several things that I think are really important to sort of note. One, we think about there are no design patterns for this. A lot of these conversations that are happening right now are very dev heavy, right? It's very engineering driven, very delivery driven, very product driven. And I think that's a risk. The modern web was not built that way. It was a much more collaborative process that we all sort of built together. And I think there's a big risk right now. Part of why I got involved in all these conversations, part of why I've really sort of threw headfirst into thinking about, all right, I'm skeptical about some of these things in terms of the ways these can be used maliciously, but I really want to understand it so that I can understand the ways that can be used this way, but also where there are opportunities for folks who may live on the design side, even if they are more dev proficient, to be able to have a fluent conversation with their engineering teams, with teams who are building, folks who have questions about, hey, I've got a small business and I want to understand how to leverage these things. So I think that, because I mean, you've seen that in the chat a lot. Folks are like, okay, I've been messing around with an LLM. I think I get what you're talking about a little bit, but I don't understand how this is going to help me improve my business. I've gotten to 2, but I don't know how to get to 4. I've gotten to 4, I don't know how to get to 6, right? And so being able to think about how, just circling back to risks, basically, I think the risk is quite significant. Not for folks who work at scale like we do, work in big organizations with lots of people who can triage problems and solve problems. The risk is for somebody who's tinkering with just enough understanding to be able to deploy these things on their site or in their business, and then something happens, a mistake, a hallucination or something, delegation, poorly implemented delegation or something like that, that causes a lot of issues, maybe a trust issue. And so I think what we need to be thinking about as we talk about agent experience and thinking about how we shape agent experience is, what do patterns look like to create resiliency and how we communicate? The chat bot, the chat interface is not a great modality for interacting with a UI. Like, it's easy in a sense that you feel like you're having a conversation, but is that a great modality for someone to have to create context on the fly? Many of you have used these tools and you figure out how the tool doesn't always understand what you're saying. It takes a lot of iteration, a lot of communication sometimes to get to the place you're trying to get to. So the risks are sort of multivariate, but I think that the question for all of us thinking about agent experience is where the opportunities, making sure that the opportunities and the risks, that the opportunities go here and the risks go down as we continue to evolve, that we don't evolve so far ahead that we're not able to catch ourselves. That's all.
Yeah. I think that, firstly, like I believe that at least a lot of my advocacy in the AX side of things is hoping that people see the opportunities for how they can kind of fit in and apply their knowledge. Because a lot of this stuff isn't new in terms of like how do we study these things and how do we improve them. It's just a new persona, right? So like to your point, doing usability tests, but targeted at agents, right? Like, and then maybe that looks more like evals and things like that these days. But what does that look like such that we can hone in on these things? And I'm going to pick on our CEO at Netlify a little bit. So Matt, and this is not his fault, but like it happened to him. Matt was just using an AI agent to code something up and deploy it. And agents, especially nowadays, are trying to add these kind of implicit memory to things. And he inadvertently brought down our production site because the agent thought he wanted to deploy it to our production site. It made an arbitrary decision to remember something, and this is far less likely to happen to a human doing these things, right? They would have to have gone out of their way to have done that. But for an agent, right, like that's just a few decisions that they have to make in a few milliseconds, and now they've done something incorrectly. And a lot of people might say, okay, all right, well, agents aren't for us because they can do those things. But the way I see it is like the job now is on us as service providers, governments, and et cetera, to understand the UX and the AX implications of these things and start optimizing for them, right? So like, it's incredibly easy on Netlify to deploy something, but that means agents can accidentally do something that an end user might not have wanted. So the onus is on us to make sure that the right barriers are there such that we can kind of protect against those things. And so where it would have been less or enough friction to where it was very intentional for a human to have done it, that friction is negligible for an agent. So we have to have different areas of friction and confirmation and things like that for when things are sensitive, and really tie that practice to, like, again, analyzing, doing these studies around how agents are using the product and then optimizing for them. But this kind of brings me to this like other side of this, which is like the UX of our agent experience decisions, right? This has come up for me recently as like, and very directly, like, I think that it's very easy to look at MCP, for example, and LLMs, tax, and things like that. But let's talk about MCP specifically. It's very easy to look at MCP as a programming problem and as a developer problem to solve. And okay, it's like map this API to that thing, and and like it's like an API thing. Oh, we know how to do this. Cool. But there's a UX side of this where it's like, when you're thinking about how an end user can actually interact with your system through an agent and delegating this stuff, when even the things that you do in terms of defining the tool name, for example. So like on MCP, just for context, you can provide, resource information, which is just kind of information, about any given thing. You can also define tools, and you can say my tool name is, deploy to Netlify, and this is the inputs that it requires. But so like when you look at that as a contract, it's like, okay, I can fulfill this contract as a programmer, no problem. But the user implications of that is whatever I call my tools, how I break my tools up to be more or less granular has downstream impacts on how reliable it's going to be for the agent, right? So to give a more practical example of this, deploying to Netlify is one, maybe two API calls to Netlify. Exposing those API calls directly to the agent was very confusing for the agent. The agent would like decide different things because of the robustness of what you could do on a given site or deploy. One example of this is, we call our team IDs account IDs, and that is, very ambiguous. Like an account ID, it could mean so many different things. And if you're trying to, let's say, update your team name to be, XYZ, it would, our initial implementation would look at our kind of contract and say, okay, I'm going to update the account ID to be X, Y, and Z. I'm going to look this up by account ID, and it would sometimes change the end user's name versus the team's name, because again, that decision of exposing account ID, which to an LLM or someone who doesn't know by account we mean team, it gets confused. So when we look at this from a programming standpoint, it's kind of like exposing your implementation details directly to a user, right? In some ways, it's kind of like if you had an HTML form with all the inputs that you could provide to that endpoint to an end user, and we wouldn't do that. We would make it succinct. We would make it clear that, oh, you want to update this, provide these two things, and it'll be fine. And that's a user experience consideration made specifically for a intentional user experience. But I think I'm seeing the same thing happening when it comes to like MCP and these agent experience decisions. So we're saying, hey, this tool call is essentially a feature. And these are the inputs I'm going to allow for this feature. And I could be very open with this, and you can change anything on the website. So one giant form to, that would be the UI equivalent of this, or very succinct. Here's my tool call. Here's this, if you're changing this configuration, here's 2 options for you. Oh, if you're configuring that, here's 5, because that's what it requires. Versus saying, here's 100 things. You can do whatever you want. Go for it. And it feels like you could do that, but like there's downstream user experience implications of that AX decision. So that's a lot of kind of like thinking through and sharing the things that I'm seeing on the UX side of this. Now I'm really curious, for either of you, like, are you seeing new UX patterns emerge because of the AX decisions that you're making to support agents themselves?
Want to go, Ron?
I was just going to say that I think that they're starting to emerge, but I think it's still really early, especially again on the world I hang out in, which is not consumer tech, right? Thinking mostly on the sort of public facing digital experience situation. It tends to render itself in the modalities you already see, chatbots and things like that. I think we're headed in that direction, but there are just a lot more risks and a lot more questions about how you deploy this, where you deploy it, before we're able to get there. But I think when you start to see it, someone asked a question about this of like, what's it going to look like and how's this going to work? I think we're close, but I think it's going to be bit by bit rather than a full scale deployment of a lot of agent tools all at once or one big suite of tools. I don't think that's going to happen on the public facing side of things because again, there are just more risks. And all frankly, just a lot less people with their eyeballs on this yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone, an agent accidentally messing up your taxes or something.
Right. I mean, and that's relatively benign because in some ways they can fix it. The issue of this that we haven't talked about, and I'm gonna let Zeno go, is we already have a dearth of customer experience, right? It's hard to get a human on the phone to help solve your problem or a human in the chatbot to solve your problem. And if we get to it, it's really important. That human in the loop is very important, that we've got to figure out where that human is. But that human can't be removed from the process because it's so risky, especially in this early stage where we're figuring all this stuff out. Maybe in 10 years, it's like an ATM, it doesn't matter. But in the beginning, ATMs, they ate your card, they would eat your card. You put a card in and they would eat it. So that's how we have to think about these kinds of deployments, is that we're still in the eating your card at the ATM stage of deploying agents.
Yeah. Dino?
And the beauty of that is that this is the worst that this technology has ever been, right? Like right now. So the beauty is like looking at this and seeing the opportunity, seeing that maybe it's 6 months, ahead of us, or 9 months, or a year, or something. And getting ready for it. I remember a story. I was chatting with the Stripe team, and Stripe has an API for billing and payments online, right? And if you want to just associate a user with a plan on a traditional SaaS app, there's a lot of moving pieces there. You need to first have a price, a customer, a subscription, a plan, and then you're associating those entities together. And at first, Stripe tried to put everything, like all the APIs they had, within tools on an MCP server. Guess what? It was very confusing for any task to be performed, because at some point the context window would just not be able to handle all the different variations. So they went backwards. They went from let's not expose everything that our API has. Let's think about the use cases first. And from the use case, then we think about which are the APIs that we're going to see. But I feel like even beyond MCPs, you see companies like Supabase and Clerk that are adding this button to their documentation pages where you can be like, and for developers, it's clear, right? Like we know developers use Cursor, they use Claude. Okay, that's great. So you can have prompts that are designed for those. But on the consumer end, we know people are using ChatGPT, right? Like in our case, ChatGPT is our third referral on our website. It's direct, Google and ChatGPT now. So it's just a reality. So maybe we can have like in our documentations, in our knowledge bases, this button like, hey, copy this as a prompt, use it on ChatGPT, go for it. Here's all the context you need to now ask the question. So there's
Yeah.
definitely a lot of interesting patterns that are emerging there.
Yeah, 100%. The self-serve use case is, I think, underappreciated, and because like there's a lot of hype and a lot of varying degrees of reality and the kind of hype around MCPs and adoption across different tools. I think to your point, Ron, I think that this is more of a, people are going to, execute on these things as they can, as they understand it and things like that. And we're still extremely early. And I think when we're at mass adoption, we're talking about, thousands, if, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of MCPs. Like it should be on the scale of the number of apps in the App Store type of thing, right? Like, and if not more, because it would be more granular, right? And the reality of MCP specifically, to your point, is that like it only helps people that have the MCP installed and are using a tool that can use it to its full extent. Ignoring the fact that just because you have an MCP, that it will be used correctly by the agent, by the model. Does the model understand it? Does it know when to invoke it and things like that? Again, like this is where that kind of hard research goes into this in terms of like, what's the best way to build your tools? What's the best way to format the description of these things such that they're more consistently being invoked? This discipline, right, of sorting out and researching how to get your system to work really well with agents, like that, that's the whole point of this kind of series around agent experience, and this builder series is to kind of talk about the challenges that people are seeing and things that they're using to overcome them. And yeah, to your point, around the self-serve context is so important. Like not too long ago, we released a feature. Shout out to Suzanne on the Netlify team. She had released it around. We have this feature called "Why Did It Fail?" And so if a build fails, you can click that, and it'll kind of give you a description around what happened and so forth. And we added a button. We actually had two. Eventually, it was two. One button is like copy context for, AI tool, and they can it'll copy everything to their clipboard, and they can paste it into ChatGPT or Claude or Cursor or whatever tool that they're using, and get it to fix it over on that side. We also added one that's like open in ChatGPT, because you can just kind of send questions over there. And we see thousands of people using this all the time, despite the answer probably already being there. But knowing the answer and how, but the kind of cool thing about agents now is it's not just, can you figure out what's wrong, but like they can just go fix it too. So giving them the various different ways. So there's MCP. If you're using MCP, then great, you should have a mechanism there. But if you're not, or you don't even know what MCP is yet, or you're not technical enough to kind of sort that out, I think that especially on the web development side, we see a lot of people potentially like less technical, maybe just, a designer that might be working on a very complex website is making changes to the design side, and maybe something broke on that side. And then like, they're not going to be pulling down the full site and debugging it on that side, but now they're blocked. We can tell them what broke, but now like giving them that self-serve context to put it in their agent to then go fix the thing on their behalf, now they're unblocked, and like they're able to really continue forward. And little micro interactions around that like really add up to be great. And there's definitely a class of thought out there that thinks that MCP is going to be the end all be all. Right? Everyone should, the web's just going to be MCP all the way down, just like right next to the turtles, right? So it's going to be MCP all the way down, and the web's fundamentally going to change to be that way. I don't think that. I think that, in my view of this, Zeno, I think you were hinting at this before. Like, I think there's going to be a very intentional, human-oriented web, and then a very intentional agent-oriented web. Because some things like sliders for interactions are meaningless to agents. Like, the aesthetic qualities, the visual cues, the practices and things that we've put into enticing humans to adopt certain things and understand certain things does not translate one-to-one to what an agent needs. So I think that we're going to see self-service agent context and interactivity is still going to be very important. The human web is still going to be very important. We're going to see browsers either asynchronously, like Operator, or real time, like you like Google working on your behalf while you're on Chrome, right, doing certain things for you, interacting with websites, and those need to be successful. And MCPs and things like that are very very good path. I mean, there's like varying degrees of like how successful do you want to be. If you're fully integrated, you have a MCP supported client and an MCP supported in server, and then all your capabilities are available through there, then you're going to be cooking, right? But like, there's this whole other side of this spectrum that represents, especially right now, the 99.99999% of the world, that needs to be supported. And even if we end up in this world where, it's like a massive percentage is all MCP based or some agent based protocol, that's great. But like, I don't see us ever getting to the point to where it's 100% that, right? Even now, right? It's not 100% web. There's a massive contextual specific use cases that are all mobile app based, right? And then the web, right? And so I think it's going to look more like that, right? And so like, maybe I don't know if it was like 2010 or 2012, where it's like everyone's just like, stop what you're doing, make a mobile app, everything's going mobile app based, right? That kind of feels like some of the reaction I'm seeing right now. It's all going to be MCP based. Forget what you've learned, before, and it's going to be that. And I think that there's going to be some sort of like rebalancing. That's like, actually, it's more of a balance of having a presence where your end users want to consume and interact with your product. Pinterest, for example, that's all mobile app. They have an important web presence for a large percentage of their user base. But depending on where your users are, that I think so. So I don't think the web's going to go anywhere. It'll just kind of adopt to be a little different. Is that aligned with y'all's thinking around that direction as well?
Yeah, I think we're too far gone. There's just going to be different modalities. I don't think it.
Yeah, there's space for every interface out there. So.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever tried to optimize your website for a refrigerator web browser, but like, I mean, it's like, depending, there are products and services out there that have to do that. Netlify is not one of them. However, it's really about, again, going back to that first principle of AX, just like for user experience, it's all about humans, right? Like, where is your end consumer, your target audience? Where are they? How are they wanting to interact with you? And are you building to support those use cases? And nowadays, we have to support agents. It's not, or rather, any industry where agents are being used, you have to support agents, right? Otherwise, the market that decides to use agents to interact with digital services, they're not going to use you, right? And that's just how it is. They're not going to be able to find you as well. They're not going to be able to use you. Agents will literally ask you to use something else and so forth. So that's what really, tying this all back to the importance of what we're doing and why we're doing it. That's really the core of it. So let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. I know there's a lot of questions around, Netlify and Resend and the various services. Hit us up on Twitter. Hit us up on Blue Sky. We would love to kind of take those questions async. Zeno, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm on X, LinkedIn, all of these channels. I'm at zenorocha.com. So yeah, I'll drop the link on the chat if that's easier.
Right.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
Yeah, man. It's forever Twitter to me, so I'm just going to keep going. I'm an anti-Xer. So awesome. And Ron, you're dropping your link in the
just find me online. Yep, I'm all online. I'm in a bunch of random places. Good talking to you all, and thanks for coming to see us today.
Right on. And I'm Sean. You'll find me as JavaScript on things. That's what my kids say that I do for a job, is JavaScript. So so that's how you can find me on Blue Sky and Twitter/X. And yeah, this has been awesome. Thanks so much, Zeno. Thanks so much, Ron. We'll see you around. And if anyone has questions, feel free to hit us up. July 22nd will be our next one. It'll be me and Kevin from Windsurf, who leads their product, where we talk about the challenges and the things that Windsurf has gone through to kind of build up Windsurf and Cascade, their coding agent, to what it is today. So again, thanks everybody. Take care, and we'll see you next time.